Hi friends, and welcome to this new tutorial. In this video I want to show you how you can connect your hardware synthesizers with Ableton to perform with a hybrid setup, and how I basically set everything up for my own live performance setups. I played now a couple of live gigs, live shows with this setup. One example actually playing right now. And following that, I got a lot of questions from people asking how everything is set up, how the hardware synthesizers are integrated into the software. So I thought I will give you a little rundown. Basically, I will be talking about two different scenarios today. The first one is a classic synthesizer, like for example the MOOG Mother 32 being connected via MIDI and then sending audio to my audio interface. And the second scenario actually is the Electron Digitone, which is transferring audio and MIDI via USB and is using a dedicated software for that. By the way, as an audio interface, I'm using an Arturia Audio Fuse Studio. It has different audio inputs and outputs, and also has the opportunity to route MIDI in and out, which is very handy and which is what I'm using. But more on that when we talk about the synthesizers. And yeah, without further ado, let's get to the Electron Digitone. So right here we have the setup. We have the Ableton Push 2, which basically is the main controller for the different scenes that I'm playing. Then we have as external synthesizers, like I mentioned, the Electron Digitone, and below here the MOOG Mother 32. Let's quickly take a closer look at the Digitone. Here we go, and go into the settings, and here I already went down to the MIDI config, which is what we will be looking at today. Looking at sync, I actually only have two things enabled. So I want the Digitone to receive clock and to receive transport from Ableton, which is basically, yeah, that whenever I hit play on the push, which I will do now, the Digitone will start to play as well. And this is for transport. And then of course clock is that everything stays in sync. Apart from that, I have nothing checked. On the port config, it is important that here on the top, input is selected to either MIDI and USB or to only USB, just to make sure that all the information is transferred via USB. The rest of the settings are basically left as they are. I just enabled, I don't know if it's a default setting, but receive notes and receive CC messages, which is quite important. But it can be that it's also set by default. If not, make sure to check that. And then the most important part actually is to set the channels right, because basically how I thought about my setup is that I dedicated different MIDI channels to different instruments. So the Digitone actually has 4 MIDI channels, as you can see here. The first one, to keep it easy, is dedicated to the Digitone's track 1, second one to Digitone's track 2, third one to Digitone's track 3, and the fourth one to Digitone's track 4. Apart from that, nothing really activated. And yeah, that actually is the setting which I have in place for the Electron Digitone. Okay, and now here we are in Ableton, and let's first take a look at the preferences of Ableton. Actually, the only really important tab for us is this one here. Apologies, it's in German, but I think yeah, you can pretty easy get what's going on here. So basically, these are the MIDI ports, and so you can see here for the Electron Digitone that there's actually nothing coming in, as we are just sending stuff out to the Digitone from Ableton here, and this is what you can see below here. So basically the Electron Digitone is receiving track information, which basically is kind of like the MIDI data according to tracks, and then of course also sync information, so that everything stays in sync. And when I press play on the push, or here in Ableton, that the Digitone will also start to play. Okay, now here in Ableton, let's take a deeper look what's actually going on here on the Digitone. These are, by the way, I already mentioned it, the first 8 tracks, or the first 8 groups, which I like to perform on my push. It groups together all the instruments that you can read here above, and I can trigger those scenes that are actually in here, or the clips, via the push 2. If you're, by the way, interested in this template, it's completely available via my Patreon. The link is in the video description, and you can get all the files basically here, all the different tracks, all the clips in there, all the different settings, so that you can take a look, do some reverse engineering, and then use all these information for yourself. Okay, Digitone. So this group is actually split into 2 different groups, which is Digitone Audio, Digitone MIDI, and then we have also the Digitone Overbridge. This actually here on the right is the plugin with where everything starts with. So basically what's going on here, we have the Overbridge, which is, yeah, like I already said, Electron's software to control different Electron devices that are connected via USB. You can also see here all the different settings that are digital here on the screen is also displayed here on the device, which is very nice. The only thing I actually added here is just behind there a saturator, because I found that surprisingly, the Digitone signal comes in a little flat or flatter over USB than via the regular outputs. And to compensate for that, I just gave it a little boost here. And I also really like the color that the saturator adds to the Digitone, as it sounds a little digital. Interestingly, way more digital than via the stereo or the normal outputs, in my opinion. But yeah, this was kind of like a good solution for me to have it perfectly playing as if the audio would be coming out of the regular outputs. Okay, and then let's take a look at the MIDI side of things. So here actually you can see 4 different MIDI tracks and a 5th one. This one actually I will cover in a separate tutorial, as it's actually a very nice way to do pattern changes on the Digitone and send pattern change information directly from Ableton to the Digitone. But more on that in a separate video to come out in a couple of weeks from now. And here we have the 4 different MIDI tracks. Each of these tracks contains clips, like you can see here. It's actually MIDI clips from my songs. I also named them. So this is the plug sound from my track New Dawn. This is the pad sound from my track New Dawn. And here's also an ARP on track number 1 coming in. And for this track, for example, you can see that track number 2 is not used at all. But of course, as this is a live set that contains a lot of different tracks, you can actually see, oh, I realized just that I only used track number 2 here in my track Ghost. Interesting. But yeah, I'm using different tracks with different melodic or percussive elements in different songs in this set. Okay, how did I actually set this up? So the first idea was actually to create MIDI data in here so that all these clips can be triggered. So for example, if I play this now, you can hear, for example, this one here. Let me quickly open the filter here. You can hear it a little bit better. So here you can see all the MIDI notes coming in, and you can hear it in the background. Bum, bum. This is actually the one of the sounds coming from the Digitone here. And actually the way I set it up was that I went here in MIDI 2. So this is actually the first thing you need to take care of. And then actually go here. You can, on the top then, if you set it up via Overbridge, you can select here the Electron Digitone and then decide to send it to the different channels. And remember in the beginning when I set to set the channels basically according to the tracks in the Electron Digitone, that's exactly what I did here. So I sent MIDI information for track number 1 to channel number 1, to channel 2, channel 3, channel 4, so that they're exactly coming in where I want them to come in on the Digitone. Then I realized actually there was a latency going on. From the Digitone using Overbridge, it can happen that this causes latency. And the cool thing that actually you can enable in Ableton is if you click this small icon here below, you can basically display the track delays. And there I realized with the test that I did that I have a delay of 39 milliseconds. Quite a lot actually, and this is what I compensated with these tracks. So all the different MIDI tracks have a delay of, or basically are starting 39 milliseconds earlier to compensate for the delay on the audio side. And yeah, this is basically how I set up the MIDI side. Let's close this group and go into the audio side of things. So basically here, again, what we have is 4 different tracks, this time audio tracks, not MIDI tracks, and they are actually receiving audio. Again, here via Overbridge, you can just, if you scroll down here, select the Overbridge track, and then select where you want to have the MIDI come from. There are actually different options here that I can choose from. I can kind of like have the whole Digitone signal be sent to a track, to have it pre-FX or post-FX, which basically then would record all the signals coming in with or without the effects. And here are the standalone tracks basically. So track 1, track 2, track 3, track 4. And again, like I did before with the MIDI tracks, everything is labeled here accordingly. So track number 1 for Digitone track 1, Digitone track 2, track number 2, and so on. The only downside of this is that actually the effects that you're using on the device will not be transferred via Overbridge, because these are send effects, and you will just get the dry audio signal. So what I did in Ableton actually, here on the send effects, you can see it here with D, E, and F. I tried, let's quickly go there. I tried to mirror the different electron effects. So basically this is kind of like a copy of the effect I would have set on the Digitone. This is the reverb. This is a copy here of the delay with different stuff going on, also some reverb going to the delay as I would do it with the send amounts on the Digitone. And then here we actually have the chorus. By the way, all of these effects also are standalone, available on Patreon if you're interested in getting them and checking out the settings. But yeah, back here to the Electron Digitone. The cool thing is now actually you can also see it. If I start play it, you can see here that audio is coming in. And the cool stuff is that if I would now arm all of these tracks, I could also record all of these tracks individually. So let's say I would want to make a track, and then I really want to go into the mixing again and mix all of the tracks independently. I can then just have recordings of the track available without the effects, by the way, so I could also in post and decide how much of the effects I want on the signal. So pretty cool. And yeah, that's actually it. That's how my whole Digitone group is set up, and how the Digitone is receiving MIDI from Ableton here, and then recording or playing back, in this case, the audio coming in via USB from the Electron Digitone. All right, now that we have the Digitone covered, let's move on to this one here, the MOOG Mother 32. The MOOG Mother 32 is a little bit of a different type of synthesizer to connect, because it goes more a classical route. It doesn't have USB, it doesn't have a digital integration, it just has a MIDI in, which you can see here, where I have the MIDI cable connected, and a regular audio output, basically, so to say. And the way how I set this up actually is that on the MOOG Mother 32 here, I like on the Digitone, I set the synth up to receive MIDI information on channel number 5. So remember, these ones here were channels 1 to 4, and channel number 5 is now reserved basically, or assigned to the MOOG Mother 32. So this is what I did in the settings of the MOOG. Then I attached the MIDI cable here, and you can see actually when I start playing that this light is flashing, and this flashes whenever the MOOG receives MIDI. I will turn it up a little bit. Yeah, you can see it here. Whenever a note is playing, the light is flashing up, which is a good sign, because it shows me that the MOOG is receiving MIDI. And then I basically routed the audio cable into my audio interface, and it comes in there on input number 5, which I will show you right now in the settings of Ableton. Back in Ableton, we are now looking at this group here, the MOOG Mother 32 group. And actually, I just have one track in here, which is a MIDI track. And this track, as you can see here, contains all the clips of MIDI information for the MOOG. So for example, if I play it now, you can hear it. Actually, the MOOG also, which you can see here, receives reverb and delay, like the Digitone does, and has basically the same scent effects on it. And actually, to connect it, the most important device, and this is actually something where Ableton is very, very handy, is actually the external instrument device. I think you can find it here in the MIDI effects. Is it here? Okay, I found it. It's actually under instruments, and you can find it here if you take external instrument and then just drag and drop it to your the track that you want it on. I also created here a preset for the Mother 32 with all my settings so that I can just drag and drop this one on whenever I need it. And actually how you set this up is actually super simple. The first thing to take care of up here is the MIDI. So here I choose my audio interface, which is the Audioface Studio. And I choose here from all MIDI tracks available, I choose channel number 5, because like I said before, on the Mother 32, I set it up that it receives incoming MIDI on channel number 5. Then the audio, here I also set, just to keep it easy also for myself, I'm using the input number 5 on my audio interface, this one here. And yeah, so now I know that this signal basically is coming in here on channel number 5. So on the MIDI and on the audio side, we are already set. And the cool thing is that this also has 2 additional things to add. You could kind of like compensate gain. So for example, if you realize your signal is not coming in hot enough, you could add or also reduce gain here if that would be needed. And something really handy is here an integrated latency compensation, because I realized when I started the push, sorry, not the push, the Mother 32, and then started to play with it, I did some tests and realized that it had a latency of 11 milliseconds. So I can now just play or paste that latency here, and yeah, now I can see here everything is perfectly fine coming in. I have some more devices on here which are for the initial setup not that important. I have a tuner on here, as the MOOG Mother 32 is an analog synth, and I really like to tune it before I play live or before I record music to make sure everything is tuned fine. This one actually here is an external FX. It's now switched off, but it would actually enable the microcosm to be added on top of the MOOG signal, which can be pretty nice. Then I just have an EQ just to reduce a little bit here in the area between 100 and 400 Hertz, and then just give it a little boost at a 4K. Nothing too dramatic, but it, yeah, sounded better to me. And then I just have a glue compressor to glue it together. And actually this is a device by my man Mr. Ed Rollo. Shout out at this place. It's kind of like a CV shaper basically, and what it does, it actually automatically creates kind of like a sidechaining effect without a compressor. So I'm just playing a sustained note, so you can hear it. If I make it more extreme, it gets even more audible. So just something that I know there's always yeah, kind of like some sidechaining going on. And yeah, that's actually it. That's how easy you can set up an external synth in Ableton. And the cool stuff is now I can just use all of these MIDI clips to send MIDI information to the Mother 32. I could also use, which is very, very nice, the Ableton push to play the Mother 32 and then directly record MIDI session in here if I would like that. However, and that is important to note, this is just a MIDI track, so when I'm recording my sets, I'm only recording the stereo out. But if I would want to record this one here as a separate audio tracks while I'm tweaking the different settings like the filter and stuff on the go and want to record that as well, I would need to create an additional audio track. and then have the audio coming in from the MOOG Mother 32, which is, let me see, here we go. It's this one, and yeah, if I now set this one here to ARM, it should also, yeah, you can see it here, the audio is coming in, it's grayed out, it's not played back, but if I would now record it here, I would have all the different changes that I do on the synth also recorded in here as well. So yeah, if that's something you want for your hardware synthesizers, then it's, I think, quite useful to have, in addition to a regular MIDI track, also an additional audio track set up to record all the signals. And yeah, that's actually how I set up my different hardware synthesizers in Ableton to play them in a hybrid setup. If you would like to see more of this or have dedicated questions, Patreon is always a good place to go. And yeah, just drop me a message there, drop me questions. I'm happy to direct respond to messages there and give you some detailed explanations. But also Patreon requests will always be yeah, prioritized when it comes to videos. Like, for example, this video here actually was a Patreon request. And yeah, if there's something more you would like to see, happy to see you over there. The link is down in the video description. And yeah, appreciate your time watching, as always. Many thanks. I hope it was useful for you, to help you to set up your synthesizers accordingly. I'm wishing you a wonderful day, and I see you in the next video. Cheers.